Last night was the first presidential debate of 2024, and also probably the worst presidential debate in the history of presidential debates, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video, and we're going to talk about them quite candidly at the risk of putting some of you off. Some of you may not like what I have to say, but as I've said in multiple videos, I'm going to be very honest, and I will occasionally criticize my party when I think my party needs to be criticized. And this is one such instance. President Biden did not perform well in this debate, nor did convicted felon Donald Trump. And right now, all of the scrutiny is on Biden. He's held to a higher standard. Donald Trump is graded on a curve. And I want to spend most of the video talking about that, the terrible, stupid things, dishonest things that Trump said and did during the conversation. But to get this out of the way, I am a proud Democrat. I have only ever voted Democrat because I think the Democratic Party's policies and record and affirmations are just better for this country than the Republicans. I voted for President Biden in 2020. If President Biden remains the Democratic candidate, the Democratic nominee, I will vote for him again. I think he's been a good president, particularly on domestic policy, on his worst day. He is vastly superior to the incompetent, malignant, narcissistic, fascist, and authoritarian that is Donald Trump. Nothing has changed. But I would be lying if I said that I thought President Biden did a good job last night. So I want to start with this so we can then focus on what the media is not talking about, including the mainstream media, nearly as much, and that is convicted felon Donald Trump. But here is an exchange between President Biden and Trump, which was particularly painful and kind of encapsulates the worst parts of Biden's performance.
What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look.
Right. So that exchange right there. Again, if you're looking for one clip to encapsulate the worst of Biden's performance and how Trump responded to it, that clip is telling. And that's why I'm not going to spend any other clip talking about Biden. But I just want to say it was a poor performance. Biden's been in public office for, 50 years. And this was the worst debate performance I've ever seen from him. I will also say incumbent presidents tend to perform poorly. President Obama, a masterful rhetorician and debater, tanked his first debate against Governor Romney in 2012, and he still won the election. So some of this is predictable, but I was surprised to see how badly Biden performed, especially when there were clips of Biden after the debate. He flew to Raleigh, North Carolina, my state, and he showed up at a Waffle House. He did a post-debate conversation, and he sounded fine. Like, he was much more energetic. His voice sounded stronger. He was more lucid. All these things are true. I have no idea if he got in his own head, if he was over-prepped, whatever. But the bottom line is he had many verbal misspeaks, stumbles, and they were noticeable. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. And he was supposed to clear the expectation, because whether we like it or not, there is the perception issue that Biden is unfit to be president. And he has to prove to the American people he is not, because unfortunately, they're not paying attention to his record, which they should. Now, with all of that in mind, I want to redirect the bulk of our attention to convicted felon Donald Trump. The frustrating thing is, as we've talked about on this channel relentlessly, Trump is graded on a curve. Trump said in 2015 that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. That's obviously the case for MAGA Republicans because they revere him as a God king. They want him. They literally are demanding that he be entitled to absolute immunity, sovereign immunity from criminal liability. He could do whatever he wants as president, order coups, assassinations, could sell nuclear secrets, all these things. His lawyers are arguing for this in front of the Supreme Court. They're demanding it. And MAGA Republicans across this country are saying, actually, yeah, that's a really good, Donald Trump should be God emperor. He should be above the law, should be above the Constitution. So we see that from his cult. But even the mainstream media, certainly right-wing media, but even mainstream media, his derangement, his lies are flying under the radar because Biden gave a terrible rhetorical performance. But I do want to spend a lot of time talking about the crazy, stupid things that Trump said in this debate. And we can't even spend, otherwise it would be like 3 hours if we covered every moment. But here's some highlights that I really want to emphasize that are truly deranged, dangerous, and dishonest from Trump.
Specific concern that voters have about you. Will you pledge tonight that once all legal challenges have been exhausted, that you will accept the results of this election, regardless of who wins, and you will say right now that political violence in any form is unacceptable?
Well, I shouldn't have to say that, but of course I believe that. It's totally unacceptable. And if you would see my statements that I made on Twitter at the time, and also my statement that I made in the Rose Garden, you would say it's one of the strongest statements you've ever seen. In addition to the speech I made in front of, I believe, the largest crowd I've ever spoken to, and I will tell you, nobody ever talks about that. They talk about a relatively small number of people that went to the Capitol, and in many cases were ushered in by the police. And as Nancy Pelosi said, it was her responsibility, not mine. She said that loud and clear. But the answer is, if the election is fair, free, and I want that more than anybody. And I'll tell you something. I wish he was a great president, because I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be at one of my many places enjoying myself. I wouldn't be under indictment because I wouldn't have been his political opponent, because he indicted me because I was his opponent.
And he goes on like this. We got some other clips on the score, but a couple of things. So notice how he doesn't answer the question. Will you accept the results of the 2024 election, win or lose? He won't do it. I'm going to show you some other clips as well where he refuses to do it. Then he says, actually, Nancy Pelosi, then Speaker of the House, she was really responsible for what happened on January 6th, except she wasn't. As we've talked about in previous videos, the National Guard, the DC National Guard, reports directly to the president, which was Donald Trump at the time, and his delegated staff. So the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army, right? But ultimately it was Trump who was in the chain of command, not Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi had no authority, none, to summon or deploy the National Guard, none. It was Trump. And Trump watched all of that unfold, watched the insurrection unfold for hours, nearly 3 hours, and didn't do a damn thing about it. Both in his capacity as commander-in-chief and president of the United States, he was the official most responsible for national security. He didn't do a damn thing. And then as the cult leader of the riotous insurrectionist mob, he also had authority over them. So he had dual-pronged, two-tier authority over this cult, and he chose not to do anything. Also, I'll point out, he was not indicted by President Biden. It was a special counsel at the federal level, right, who was removed from the Department of Justice, which in turn is removed from Biden. So it was like 2 layers of separation. And then the other indictments came from Fonnie Willis, the district attorney of Fulton County, and Alvin Bragg, district attorney of Manhattan. These are state level prosecutions. He has no evidence that Biden was somehow responsible for it. But another clip
was, will you accept the results of the election, regardless of who wins? Yes or no, please.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely. I would have much rather accepted these, but the fraud and everything else was ridiculous. And if you want, we'll have a news conference on it in a week, or we'll have another one of these in a week.
So again, he's saying if it's free and fair, well, the last one was free and fair. You didn't accept it. It's still not an unequivocal yes. And you have no evidence of the widespread fraud that you've been talking about for years. 60 court cases you lost, or 61, you lost 60 on both standing and merit, depending on the case. But he, like every other elected Republican these days, seemed to be allergic to the notion of actually accepting the results of an election. Now, one of Biden's better moments in the debate was when he hit on the fact that Trump is only 3 years younger than him. So by any objective standard, also a very old man and a lot less competent.
President Biden, you would be 86 at the end of your second term. How do you address concerns about your capability to handle the toughest job in the world well into your 80s?
Well, first of all, I spent half my career being criticized being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me.
Very true. This is where Biden is absolutely correct. So the problem is, right now, everyone is focusing on Biden's performance as the candidate. Because right now he has 2 roles. He is the president of the United States. He is chief executive. He is head of state, head of government, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And he's also the candidate for that office. It's 2 different roles with 2 different disciplines, 2 different skill sets. Right now, President Biden is focusing on the fact that, listen, whatever you think of me as a candidate, I was just objectively the better president. And he is. We've talked about this in video after video after video after video. Folks, look at what Biden accomplished versus what Trump accomplished, even if you think what Biden accomplished is terrible. Like, let's say you think that the bipartisan infrastructure law is just a really bad idea. Well, that was Biden's goal, and Biden got it done. And by the way, an infrastructure law was also Trump's goal, and Trump failed to get it done, right? So even take the value judgment of what both men accomplished out of the equation and just measure up what they promised, what they said they would do, and who got more of it done. Donald Trump passed a $2 trillion tax cut for the rich, okay? He promised to build a wall. He failed. He promised to repeal and replace Obamacare. He failed. He promised to wipe out the national debt. Not only did he fail, he added $8 trillion to it. He appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. Good for him, right? If that's your vantage point. But any Republican president would have done that because he's just given a list from the Heritage Society, the Heritage Foundation, and the Federalist Society, excuse me. And any Republican president would have approved that list. It was Mitch McConnell, really, who did the legwork. But whatever, give Trump credit for that. That's fine. It was on his watch. Whereas what's President Biden done? Well, he's appointed a Supreme Court justice. He's appointed more federal judges during his administration than Trump did during his, even though that was Mitch McConnell's mission in life. The Inflation Reduction Act, the single greatest investment in climate change, the bipartisan infrastructure law, again, an apples to apples comparison. Biden got it done in 1 year. Trump failed for 4 years, just objectively better. The American Rescue Plan, which pulled us out of or prevented a double-digit recession, it created 4 million jobs. Let's look at jobs. Even if you control for COVID recovery, Biden has created more jobs per month than Trump ever did. And I'm not inclined to grade him on a curve for COVID because he was responsible for managing the recovery. Biden got 70% of Americans, adults, at least one vaccination, which allowed the economy to safely open back up. The PACT Act, which boosted veterans' health care. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is the biggest piece of gun control, gun safety legislation in 30 years, and on and on and on. Biden has his legislative and executive record is simply objectively better than Trump's, and he is so right to hit Trump on that fact. Another clip here where Biden had a really good moment was, and we've heard reporting that Biden takes this part very seriously when it comes to how Trump, according to John Kelly, a 4-star general who was Trump's chief of staff, right, the most powerful person in Trump's White House besides Trump himself, according to General Kelly, Donald Trump referred to veterans as losers and suckers, particularly those who suffered injury during war. And that reportedly for years triggered Biden, right, whose son was a veteran. Beau Biden was a veteran as well. So I want to play this clip. This is one of Biden's strongest moments.
My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
President Trump?
First of all, that was a made-up quote, suckers and losers. They made it up. It was in a third-rate magazine that's failing, like many of these magazines. He made that up.
Except, again, as Biden will point out in a different clip, he's like, it was a 4-star general who stood beside you who went on the record to say that you said those things, right? So now you're, basically impugning the honor of not only a former Trump official, but a 4-star general as well. There's no reason for that guy to lie. Then it comes down to who was more honest. Well, CNN, who moderated the debate, did not fact check Trump in real time, or Biden for that matter. But after the fact, they did. And they said Biden told some falsehoods. But when it came to Trump, well,
the Trump list, it is way, way longer. So deep breath. He said some Democratic states allow people to execute babies after birth, an egregious lie that is illegal in every state. He said everybody, even Democrats, wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. Roe was supported by 2/3 of Americans, even more Democrats. He said every legal scholar wanted Roe overturned, abortion returned to the states. Legal scholars have told me directly this is not true. He said the U.S. currently has the biggest budget deficit ever. No, that happened under Trump in 2020. He said the U.S. currently has a record trade deficit with China. That also happened under Trump in.
And it goes on like this for 3 minutes. Okay. Again, there's actually a written version of this as well. Both President Biden and former President Trump made false and misleading claims, but Trump did far more than Biden, just like in their debates in 2020. Trump made more than 30 false claims at the Thursday debate. They included numerous claims that CNN and others have already debunked during the current presidential campaign or prior. And it goes into vivid details. The Nancy Pelosi turned down 10,000 National Guard troops for the U.S. Capitol, that Americans don't pay the cost of tariffs on China, that Europe accepts no American cars, that fraud marred the results of the 2020 election, and so on and so forth. They go into vivid detail. And I mean, you'd be scrolling for days to get to the bottom of this article. That's something, unfortunately, that's being buried by the mainstream media. The fact that Donald Trump told a ton of lies and was infinitely more misleading and dishonest than President Biden. The Biden campaign's official Twitter page have talked about this. Here are just some of the key questions that Trump refused to answer at the debate. If you watched those painful 90 minutes, you will note that Trump very often didn't even answer the question. President Biden, for all of the awkward stumbles, the painful stumbles that we saw, attempted to engage with the substance of the question every single time. More often than not, when Trump was asked a new question, he would want to revisit the previous question if he didn't feel that he got the last word on it. Right? He very rarely engaged in the substance, but that's Trump in a nutshell. Now, I do want to spend some time unpacking the response to the debate. We'll get to the polls in just a second, but a swing voter was asked by MSNBC, this is just an example of who he's voting for after the debate.
If the election were tomorrow, who would you vote for?
Me? Say no. I'll vote for Biden for sure.
Would that have been your answer before the debate?
No.
If the election were
So believe it or not, there were some people who watched that debate, as painful as it was, and actually walked away supporting Biden more. Okay. I imagine that that's not going to be the prevailing narrative, but that did happen. Frank Luntz, a Republican pollster who conducts swing polls and, focus groups and things like that, and he's always graded Trump on a curve. He said, my group of undecided voters are moving away from Trump as he gets more and more vicious towards Biden. They complain that this sounds like a senior citizen bingo hall argument. Again, bad news for Trump. It's not all good news, even though the media wants to insinuate that it's all bad news for Biden. CNN, who moderated the debate, also conducted a poll among 15 undecided voters in battleground states. 7 say Biden won, 7 say Trump won, and 1 is undecided. So there's some indication that this is not as lopsided as you think. Okay. However, there are some other polls that say that Trump won. C-SPAN, 324,000 votes on Twitter. 69% say that Donald Trump won. Only 20% say that Biden won. And I think another one as well, CNN, who won the first poll. Again, this isn't swing state. These aren't swing voters. These aren't swing state voters. These are just respondents, period. In the first debate in 2020, 60% say that President Biden won the first debate against Donald Trump in 2020 against then incumbent President Trump. 2024, 67% say Trump won against now incumbent President Biden, and 33% say that Biden won. So here's what I want to say. This debate happened in late June. The election is 4 months away in November, right? 4 months is an eternity. It's entirely possible that the American people will forget about this, although you can bet that Republicans and the Fox Propaganda Network are going to do everything in their power to spin this purely on President Biden's failures in this debate. They will completely omit Donald Trump's many, many, many failures, and they will try to make this a recurring issue. There is a second debate in September, so Biden has the opportunity to course correct. Also, it's questionable about to what extent debates matter. I mean, if you look at polls, 80 plus say that debates will not determine the outcome of the election. But given the razor-tight margins that this election will likely have, it's important that we not take these opportunities for granted. People who say the debates don't matter at all and Biden can afford to do whatever he wants or Trump can afford to do whatever he wants in this debate, that's just mistaken. Both of them have to try. They are incentivized to do their best in this debate, in the future debate as well. Right now, there's a lot of panic on the Democratic side. People are calling for President Biden to drop out. I've not done that. I understand why that conversation would be had. I understand why people are calling for that conversation to be had. I get it. Because again, there are two roles here: president, chief executive, candidate for president. Biden is objectively a good president, as far as I'm concerned, particularly with respect to foreign or domestic policy for the reasons that I described earlier. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's the best candidate. However, people are saying he should drop out. What's the alternative, right? People say, generic Democrats perform better against Trump in the polls. That's true. But then when you actually make that generic Democrat not generic by giving them an identity, like say Governor Gavin Newsom or Governor Josh Shapiro or Governor Tim Walz, Governor J.D. Pritzker, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, blah, 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 if you actually put names to them, they tend to poll considerably worse against Trump compared to Biden. I'll also say, where are the calls for Donald Trump to call out from the media? Now, I don't want Donald Trump to run for president, and I've never wanted him to run for president, and I don't think he was fit or qualified to be president even before he announced he was running again. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Donald Trump should drop out because he's manifestly unfit for the office. He's incompetent. He's stupid. He's cruel. He's narcissistic. He's an adjudicated fraudster, an adjudicated rapist. He's a convicted felon. But here's the difference. I am a left-wing commentator, right? So it's probably baked into the equation that I think that Trump should drop out for all these things, but I'm saying it explicitly. Why aren't the mainstream media? Why isn't the New York Times? Why aren't the CNN? Why aren't they calling for Trump to drop out? Why is Donald Trump graded on a curve and Joe Biden is held to an infinitely higher standard? That's really frustrating. That just creates an environment where there is no margin for error. And I think it's perfectly fair to criticize President Biden's performance. I also think it's perfectly fair to demand that the media, particularly the mainstream media, because the right-wing media definitely won't do it, hold these people to the same standards. Absolutely hold them to the same standards. And they should also devote time to going through Donald Trump's deceits, his dishonesty, his terrible performance with respect to the substance of this debate. And yet, the vast majority of attention is on President Biden. So those are my thoughts about the debate. I think that we need to spend more time talking about the terrible, deranged, crazy things that Donald Trump's talked about. I think we need to be fair, call balls and strikes, and admit that this was not a great performance for President Biden. And I understand that some of this might have offended my audience, but again, I feel like I have an obligation to tell the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. So with all that in mind, let me know what you think in the comments.